National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and I'm joined today by Johanna Farmer from NCJFCJ. She will give a spiel after that, but before we get started, we just have a few housekeeping things to go over. Of course, we have our lovely grant disclaimer. This is just to let you know that this presentation is supported by our lovely grant through OJJDP. Points of views or opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of OJJDP or the U.S. Department of Justice. If you don't know a little bit about us, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, we are one of the oldest judicial membership organizations in the country. We have over 30,000 judges and professionals that we have served throughout our time here, and over 4 million families have been affected by the work that we do. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter who will give you a little background. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Johanna Farmer, and I'm a program attorney with the National American Indian Court Judges Association. NCJFCJ is a national association. We're a nonprofit comprised of judicial personnel from tribal courts and others who are devoted to supporting and strengthening tribal justice systems through education, information sharing, and advocacy. On the slide, you can see a few of our goals, but it includes partnerships and collaborations like with the National Council to ensure that all of you are getting education around what's happening in tribal justice systems, as well as how to support tribal members who you serve in state courts. Next slide. Today, we want to help you understand the impact that staff turnover can have on child welfare cases. In particular, we're looking at child welfare personnel, so caseworkers, social workers. Then we're going to explore the role that judicial leadership has in addressing turnover, looking at the enhanced resource guidelines to provide you with some tools to use and best practices for managing turnover, and then identify some strategies to help retain child welfare professionals within your realm and how your role as a judge fits into this. Next slide. So caseworkers are responsible for determining the validity of child abuse and neglect reports. They're assessing safety and making placement decisions. They're determining eligibility for benefits. They're making timely and appropriate referrals for treatment and other supports. And they're implementing prevention and crisis services to families. And not all staff turnover is preventable, but awareness of the factors that predict high turnover can help inform both courts, public and private provider agencies in efforts to strengthen the child welfare workforce. So we're going to look at what is the scope of the issue around social worker turnover. Next slide. So nationally, the turnover rate for social workers ranges from 20 to 40% nationally. Now that is a giant number. To give some context, in October of 2024, if you look at the Department of Labor's information, the average employee turnover rate was 3.3% for jobs in general. So if we're comparing that range, it is definitely vastly different. And the annual turnover rate below 12% are considered optimal in health care and human services sectors. The majority of turnover for caseworkers is voluntary, meaning they're leaving of their own choice. They're not being involuntarily terminated or resigning from positions. A 2014 meta-analysis indicated that stress, feelings of emotional exhaustion, an organizational's commitment and job satisfaction had the highest effect on caseworkers' desires to leave their positions. So we're seeing that things like caseloads being unmanageable can really have an impact on a caseworker. I know when I worked in Arizona with a tribe, we had a pretty low caseload for our caseworkers, but the state caseload was probably over 100 cases, which meant if you're counting children, it could be even larger than 100 individuals that you're working with. The best practice is to have 12 to 15 children on a caseload, which I'm not sure if anyone is accomplishing 12 to 15 children on a caseload. But when we think about this big picture, how do courts help to ensure that a caseload is 12 to 15 children? Are we keeping cases open unnecessarily long? Are we making sure that families are connected to services in order to close cases so that way caseloads can become more manageable? Of course, caseworkers work closely with families and children experiencing trauma, and that can be very stressful and can be a cause for compassion fatigue, for secondary trauma. An imbalance between job demands and job skills, a lack of job control, um, effort reward imbalance. So, if there's discrepancies between resources that exist, expectations, and the job reality, are some of the leading risk factors for the development of burnout or other work related mental health impairment. So, when we're looking at it from a court perspective, how are some of these things being managed within the court? And then lastly, a lot of turnover can occur because of inadequate compensation. This, of course, is particularly challenging when we're looking at tribal communities where the system is significantly under-resourced. If we look at tribal court funding, uh, funding towards tribes is less than $6 million in a year. And so if you're looking at, over 320 tribal court systems in the United States, that is a significant under-resourcing of just the court systems, let alone when you're looking at funding for social services. There was probably 15 years of time where there was no increase in funding for social workers in tribal communities. So inadequate compensation is definitely a challenge when we're looking at turnover rates of social workers. Next slide. So, what are the consequences for children and families when we're looking at turnover? Of course, we understand that it has an impact on children and families. When one caseworker leaves, another one comes in. They have to catch up on the progress of the case. They have to rebuild relationships with the families. They have to build relationships with others who are working on the case. They have to become aware of the resources that exist. How do I access these things? What kind of things are going on that I need to be aware of in the case? And how one caseworker might manage the case could be completely different than how a new caseworker is managing the case, which can result in inconsistent case management. If a caseworker has been working with a family for, let's say, a year, and then a new caseworker comes in, new expectations have to be developed. Again, that relationship building is really important, and that has to all happen anew. And so a family also has to learn, okay, how is this case manager going to manage? Are they going to be more hands-on? Are they going to be more hands-off? Are they going to be helping me to access the same things the original caseworker was? Effectiveness in the caseworker role requires this expert use of specialized knowledge and skills in these really complex, dynamic, emotion-laden situations. And brand new caseworkers, so people who are inexperienced in casework, typically lack that specialized expertise, training, and experience necessary to perform the job as well. And as a result, there can be a service effectiveness that decreases when more experienced employees are leaving, which of course has a consequence on the children and families. Turnover can unfortunately also result in delays in case progression, which prolongs the length of each case. And then consequently, that will lead to the duration that children spend in care. These delays have not only disrupted the timeline for achieving permanency, but also constrain the fragile relationships that exist between families and the professionals who are tasked with supporting them. Effective casework also requires well-developed social networks with care providers from other sectors, different community resources, and then colleagues within the child welfare field and, within the court and the other systems that, interact with the child welfare field. So high turnover disrupts these social ties and, of course, may contribute to less effective casework as a result. Again, it can fracture that communication with families and diminish trust, which further complicates efforts to reunify children with their families and other established outcomes. So these disruptions have placed limitations on service delivery, the quality of service delivery at times, as professionals struggle to maintain consistency and effectiveness amidst these challenges. So altogether, these factors often lead to family separation rather than prevention or preservation, and of course, impact an already overloaded foster care system. Some of the studies out there show that successful foster placement depends more on the actions of the caseworker than on either the family problem that precipitated the placement, the characteristics of the child who is in care, or the characteristics of the foster parents. Children associated with only one caseworker are significantly more likely to be returned to the home of his or her biological parent. And studies also show that caseworker turnover had its greatest effect in the first 3 years of placement. And of course, we wouldn't want any child to stay in for longer than 3 years, but we understand that sometimes that happens in some cases. So if we are looking at longer term cases, of course, the caseworker turnover may be greater and then has that larger impact on children and families. In addition to the consequences for children and families, every time, Cassandra, can we go to the next slide? So caseworker turnover can be challenging for courts. It can result in increased case backlogs. Caseworkers may need more time to catch up on the progress of the case, or there may be an absence of a caseworker altogether. So someone else may be filling in, a supervisor, another person within the social services agency may be filling in. In addition to case backlogs, caseworkers will need to be educated on the court practices and procedures. So what's going on? How do I handle this case? And if you have brand new caseworkers who are new to social work, of course, there's a lot more catching up that they need to do about how a case progresses through a system. But if you have a caseworker who's coming from another place, they have to be educated on what your court practices and procedures are. As implementation sites, caseworkers would need to be educated on strategies that you're exploring to advance your court system. Caseworker turnover can result in compromised decision-making. So has the new caseworker met with the parents? Have they met with the children? Have they met with other staff? Do they have a full picture of what's occurring within the family to be able to provide that information to the court? Of course, courts rely on the information from caseworkers, especially if there's an absence of information from anywhere else. So if the only information you're getting is from caseworkers, and you have a caseworker who's brand new and they don't have a full picture of what's going on with the family, how, as a judge, are you able to make a good decision about this case if maybe it's even a new case to you? So that's where that can definitely be a challenge. Also, do you know caseload size? Cassandra, can you go to the next slide? I think we were missing a slide. So I'll just talk about it. Cassandra, if you want to go back to the slide about challenges for courts. There's also some system impacts that I wanted to talk about. So as I'm talking about the system impacts, if people want to put into the chat what other challenges that you're experiencing when caseworkers turn over? So every time a caseworker leaves the workforce, the child welfare workforce, the cost to the agency, the department is approximately 70% to 200% of the exiting employee's annual salary. So that can be a huge cost to the system. Direct costs related to overtime, staff separation, and then, of course, hiring and training new staff. There's a cost associated with hiring new staff on, training new staff. So when someone leaves the agency, we realize that that has a system impact. And of course, for the child welfare system that's already strained with resources, how can we keep caseworkers in order to prevent that cost of turnover? And then, of course, there's indirect costs to other staff. There's increased paperwork. Staff may have more cases assigned to them. There may be exhaustion from overwork. We lost a case manager, so we need you to fill in. And then supervisors may be redirecting their time from being able to supervise caseworkers to providing those direct services. And then one of the other system impacts is the failure to meet federal performance standards. So if we're looking at caseworkers are the gatekeepers as an example for our federal Title IV-E funding. So if we have a caseworker who's missing and they're the ones that are determining eligibility and they're making sure that things are happening within the timeline, if there's no one to be able to do that paperwork or to determine that eligibility, then we potentially can fail to meet these federal performance standards, which could potentially lose funding for the child welfare system.
Johanna, we did have one comment if you want me to read it. Someone in the
Yeah.
chat wrote, the bond made with the award is taken away, then the trust is also taken and the cycle starts over again to gain the trust of the ward, which is, I think, what you were referring to.
Yeah, that's perfect. That bond is one of the, we'll talk about some of the strategies later on, but that bond is sometimes one of the hardest things to regain, or that trust is hard to regain when you have that caseworker turnover.
And Judge Romero also put something in the chat for other challenges: continued hearings due to lack of timely agency report, frustration by parent attorneys, GAL, CASAs, and of course parents, and children's frustration.
Yes. And if there are other things, other challenges that you're experiencing, please feel free to put them in the chat. But yeah, continued hearings is definitely one of the things that can be experienced when we have caseworker turnover. So judicial leadership can play a pivotal role in mitigating the impact of social worker turnover, with, of course, the understanding that a court is outside of a social services agency. But how can you use your role to help mitigate that impact of turnover? Child welfare cases impose this special obligation on juvenile and family court judges to oversee case progress. And case oversight includes two requisites: one, child welfare agency fulfillment of its responsibility, and parental cooperation with the tribe or the state. And so when we're looking at child welfare agency fulfillment of its responsibilities, turnover can have an impact. And it's, case oversight from the judge can really help make sure the child welfare agency is still fulfilling its responsibility. And then, of course, some of these strategies that we're going to talk about is going to help out with that parental cooperation piece. Next slide. So judges act as a key figure in ensuring case continuity. So judges play that pivotal role in maintaining stability and progress within the child welfare system. We'll talk a little bit later about NCJFCJ's enhanced resource guidelines, but the one case, one judge is a perfect example of how judges can play this pivotal role in maintaining that stability and ensuring that the case is progressing along, even if there are turnover occurring within the social workers. Judges are able to hold agencies accountable for their responsibilities, ensuring that children and families receive consistent support that they need throughout the duration of the case. The accountability from the court can look like timely and accurate documentation. So even if staff turns over, is a child welfare agency providing detailed, up-to-date case files with a comprehensive record of interactions, decisions, and actions taken? What Judge Ramiro was saying was like that continued hearing because there isn't a timely agency report. It's the court can hold the agency responsible for making sure those timely reports are being provided to the agency because it's not fair to the families to have a continued hearing because of the lack of a timely report from the agency. So that's one way to hold the agency accountable. Another is clear, consistent communication. Judges can ensure that children and families are informed about changes within the agency or changes within their caseworkers. And judges can also ensure that the agency is communicating with the children, with the families, and with the other stakeholders. It's your opportunity when you're in court to say, agency, what are you doing? How are you communicating with the children and families? Are you having regular communication with them? And then asking the children and the families themselves, what kind of communication are you getting with the caseworker? Do you feel like it's consistent? Do you feel like you need more from the caseworker? And then, of course, accountability from the court for child welfare staff is fulfilling the court obligations. Judges can ensure that the agency is fulfilling court-ordered actions or services that you're requiring. And then another judicial leadership thing is when new social workers join the team or come into your court, you as a judge can take proactive steps to bring them up to speed promptly, which can minimize disruptions to service delivery and safeguarding the well-being of those that are involved. We'll talk more about strategies to support, but if the rest of the team is consistent, a hearing can be opened up about how a case is progressing. And if you start with the perspective of the family, so asking the parent, asking the child if they're in the court, how has it gone these last 6 months if it's a status hearing update? So you're hearing how the case is progressing from the perspective of the family. You're hearing what impact any turnover may have from the perspective of the family. And then you're able to, again, go back and have that accountability for the child welfare agency. One of the biggest things that I think is really helpful, especially when it comes to turnover, is collaboration. Judges can help work closely with the agencies to address workforce challenges, fostering an environment that supports recruitment, retention, and professional development. Again, knowledge is power. So do you know if the agency is tracking turnover? Are they tracking the reasons people are leaving or how they're leaving? Is it voluntary? Is it involuntary? Is compensation adequate? What kind of professional development is being offered for individuals? I was lucky enough to be at the All Sites meeting in August, and Orange County is doing some really wonderful things with their social workers, offering scholarships for school, and then it's paid back in time as a county social worker for 2 years. So, disruptive innovation. So, how are individuals staying within the social work field? And once you have a good organization, people want to stay. So, once you get them in the door, then how do you keep to retain them? Judges can actively promote interdisciplinary collaboration, encouraging professionals from various fields work together effectively to meet the complex needs of children and families. Child welfare cases in particular are an area where having more people at the table to support this child and family can only make things more successful. Shared knowledge can help reduce disruption. So if we have interdisciplinary collaboration, we also have multiple team members who have knowledge of the case. So if one social worker leaves, all of the team still has knowledge about what's going on with the family, and there isn't the same kind of disruption if it was just one caseworker working with this family, and maybe they're connected to these individual services, but that caseworker might be the only one holding all of that knowledge about the family. And if that caseworker leaves, then all of that knowledge that that caseworker has is then, of course, leaving with them. Collaboration between social workers, judges, attorneys, therapists, guardian ad litems ensures continuity for children and families, even when turnovers occur. Also, collaboration creates a network of professionals who can offer guidance, mentorship, and emotional support to social workers, which can help reduce those feelings of isolation and burnout that social workers can really, face when they're going through it. Collaborative teams can also maintain centralized case records. So if new staff comes on, they can quickly access critical information about the family and continue with case progress and not having to catch up as much. Families, of course, benefit from having other professionals who remain involved in a case and can bridge that gap during transitions to ensure also that there's consistent points of contact for a family. If one caseworker leaves and that was their only point of contact, a family might not know, well, where do I go? Who do I contact? Collaborative teams can also help onboard new workers more effectively by sharing insights, historical context, and strategies for managing specific cases. If you've been working with a family, you're aware of kind of these are the barriers that we're facing with the family. Here are some of the strategies we've used. And then also collaborative teams can help inform about, okay, this is how we manage a case. Experienced team members can help mentor those incoming social workers, helping them acclimate quickly to agency's practices and the culture of the agency. And then collaboration also ensures consistent messaging and coordinated action among professionals. It helps to build trust with families who otherwise might feel frustrated by frequent staff changes. So when families experience this cohesive team effort, they're less likely to feel abandoned or overlooked. Of course, I always believe that collaborative approaches bring together professionals with varied experiencing. It enables creative solutions to challenges that might otherwise overwhelm individual social workers. The more people you have at the table, the more understanding you have of the kind of resources that exist out there. Teams can also pool resources and connections to ensure that children and families receive the support they need, regardless of those changes in staff. So these are some of the ways that judges can help create a system that's both more resilient and responsive, ensuring the best possible outcome for those involved. Next slide. So there are a number of court practices that can be implemented to help minimize disruption when a caseworker leaves. So one is there should be regular case reviews and again, accountability. So set clear expectations for documentation and file handover between social workers. So even if you're not experiencing turnover right now, how do you set expectations for the social services agency about what you expect as a judge if there is turnover within caseworkers? So having those clear expectations set can really help everyone understand what it is that you're expecting. And then review transition plans during hearings to ensure continuity of care for children. If we have a caseworker who is voluntarily leaving, we might be able to understand what's going on prior to that caseworker leaving. So we can say, okay, what is it that we're going to do? Who's going to help step in when this caseworker leaves? And again, if you're having collaborative teams who are helping, that's really useful because you have more people that are touch points for those families. And then have flexible scheduling and case reassignment strategies to be able to help minimize disruptions. And when we talk about flexible scheduling, you know, does the social services agency maybe need a little more time? But again, without trying to minimize those disruptions. And then prioritizing the well-being of children in decision making. So asking specific questions about the impact of social workers turnover for the children and families is something that a judge can do. Of course, we talked a lot about collaboration. So a multidisciplinary team is also one way to minimize disruption. Multidisciplinary team decision-making approach for child welfare is a good way of providing a thorough assessment of needs and strengths, and also to continue to keep families connected to appropriate community-based providers. Next slide. So besides those practices, what other practices do you have in place to help with caseworker turnover? Or do you have any practices that are helping with caseworker turnover?
So you guys can go ahead and put something in the chat or unmute yourself and speak to the group for this part.
If I may add, this is John Romero, and I think one of the things that is helpful is having at least monthly meetings with the leadership of your local child welfare agency, the legal folks and the case management folks, just to see how things are going, to let them know that you want to know from them how things are going and how you can be of assistance, because they can tell you from their perspective how things aren't going in the hearings that you're having and the way you're managing your cases. And alternate those hearings by hosting 1 month at your facility or at a place for breakfast or lunch. And then the next month, let them host it so it's not just in your courthouse, not just in your turf or on their turf. But if you don't have that regular ongoing communication, you don't know what you may need to know about their perspective on what needs improvement. Uh, One of the things that Johanna mentioned earlier is about accountability, holding the department accountable, and of course the attorneys who practice in your system. But I believe it's also important that judges be accountable themselves for what their job is as gatekeepers, as the focal point of what's going on and how you're supposed to manage your case as well by ensuring that all those other things come into play. But that's just one of many things, and I'll stop there and let someone else speak.
Thank you, Judge Romero.
Someone in the chat said, engaging social workers while in the courtroom proceedings, acknowledging them and expressing appreciation on a regular basis. So that rapport that you as a judge and in the courts have as well with the social workers.
Yes.
Oh, Judge Romero, you had your hand up?
Well, I meant to give a thumbs up, but I think that certainly engaging all of the participants in the court proceeding, especially the families, the parents and the children, because they're the ones feeling the pain of family separation and being, in their minds at least, unjustly handled by the government. So I think that when there's an opportunity to give attaboys to the child welfare workers, to the attorneys, and certainly to the parents and the children in what's going on, helps promote a different sense of engagement, a positive sense of engagement. And we too often, I think, tend, because of time constraints and being behind schedule, hurrying up the hearings, and we're doing great damage to the process if we don't give enough time for the hearings to do those things that really matter to the folks, not just the technicalities of the process, but acknowledging them as human beings as well.
Yeah, that's great. And when we talk about flexibility and scheduling too, it's not just like what days or times that we're being able to schedule. It's about having that space to be able to have those conversations about what's going on. Like Judge Romero was saying, it's like, how do we make sure we have enough time to acknowledge the work that's being done by everyone that's in the courtroom towards this goal of, reunifying these children to these parents.
Someone also mentioned in the chat that we recognize that the courtroom is not always conducive to open communication. We are working on determining what can be addressed in a staffing or a meeting versus what needs to occur in a courtroom setting.
That's great. I think, when we think about these things in advance, we can have an understanding of, oh, these are the kind of things we address in the courtroom, or these are the kind of things that we address, like Judge Romero said, in a monthly meeting that we have as the court and the agency. These are the kind of things we address. What kind of practices and procedures do we have in place to address these things to combat them early on? So it's true, the courtroom is not always conducive for that open communication, especially if it's a more structural issue or, general, social worker turnover. And these are the practices that we're going to have in place in this collaboration.
And there's one more comment too. I think it's common to do exit interviews when staff leave, but there's also value in doing ongoing interviews to learn more about why people stay as well, which is a great comment.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Judge Romero?
I just want to add that sometimes the issue of caseworker turnover is not something that is easily handled or addressed at your local level. Sometimes, again, code of professional or judicial conduct governing what we can do and cannot do, having a meeting with, the secretary or the big person in charge of the child welfare agency to let them know from your perspective as a court officer what isn't happening that should be happening. And I think a reminder to all of us that, at least in my experience, we point to the Child Welfare Agency, the Social Services Agency, as the main player, that if things are going wrong, it's their fault. They need to be fixed. If things are going well, we never talk about the positives that happen every week in our court. And of course, the media doesn't care about that. But I think that to have a sense that we're all in this together. We are the child welfare system, including judges and attorneys who practice in the system. It is not just the child welfare agency. And if you don't believe me, wait until after this round 4 of the Child and Family Services Review, when court systems and attorneys are being evaluated right along with the rest of the system, which includes, of course, the Child Welfare Agency.
There was another comment that says, when I was a professor of social work, I had agency social workers as guest speakers in my class. This helped promote the importance of caseworkers.
Yes, I think, like we said, they are a vital and crucial piece, but this really is a collaborative effort. And, we talk about child welfare and it can be pretty adversarial, but at the end of the day, what we all want is the same thing. It's just how we go about getting there and who are the players that are all at play and how do we support each other to have the successful outcome for this family. Next slide. And please feel free to continue to put in, additional practices that you're doing. If we looked at what are kind of the strategies then that we can help to promote, turnover not happening. So if we look at the National Council's enhanced resource guidelines, there are some things that can help with the disruptions that occur because of turnover. So like I said earlier, that one family, one judge case assignment and calendaring, one of the key principles of permanency planning is that judges must provide this fair, equal, effective, and timely justice for children and families throughout the life of a case. And through frequent and thorough review, judges can exercise their authority to order and monitor the timelines, quantity, quality, and the cultural responsiveness of services for children and families. Judges can oversee the family's progress towards addressing the issues that brought them to the attention of the court, and then oversee the progress towards safety, permanency, and well-being for children. To do this, judges have to ensure that there's communication, collaboration, and cooperation amongst all of the people that are handling the case for any given family. So, of course, it is the responsibility of the judges are best accomplished when we have the same judge overseeing all cases, regardless of the case type, that are impacting the care, placement, and custody of the child in a one family, one judge case assignment and calendaring system. So under this case assignment system, children and families have the same judge for the life of all the cases in which any family member is involved. Having that same judge preside over all the hearings ensures orders related to the child throughout the case will be informed by this thorough understanding of the history, decisions, challenges, and successes in each case, as well as enables a full analysis of the reasonable efforts based on all of the information available that we have about this child and this family. And of course, we are trying to continually break down those barriers of these silos that exist, not just the silos that exist, within departments, but also the silos that exist between juvenile cases and child welfare cases. But this long-term perspective of having one judge, one case, can help identify patterns of behavior exhibited over time by all the parties involved in the case. And then it also prevents a judge from relying too heavily on the social service agency's recommendations. So this is particularly true as it relates to what we're talking about today with social worker turnover. So the judge having that perspective, that long-term perspective, that child and family can really help if there is social worker turnover. One of the other mechanisms is having a sound case flow management system by the juvenile and family court to assure that delays in the court process aren't interfering with the timely achievement of permanency. So case flow management helps the court by monitoring the agency to make sure the case is being moved diligently and decisively towards completion. The basic tools of case flow management include judicial leadership and commitment, standards and goals, monitoring and information systems, scheduling for credible hearings and trial dates, and judicial control of continuances. Additionally, key characteristics of effective case flow management in child abuse and neglect cases are the use of time-certain calendaring and court policies and procedures that serve to front load the case process. So the court's case flow management procedures should be set up to align with any legal deadlines and also enable the court to identify or flag cases that are outside the accepted time standards that you're experiencing. The enhanced resource guidelines also, when we talk about this front loading the case process, those front loading procedures being put in place at the earliest point possible can help the parties begin to do all they can to minimize the length of time that children remain in a temporary placement. So court processes that front load the system, such as settlement or pretrial conferences, family group decision-making or family team meetings, child protection mediation, could all be explored or implemented within your court to help alleviate some of these things. Research examining the impacts of these front-loading procedures have found them to help identify extended family members for placement. They can help increase the quality of safety and case planning. They can reduce the amount of time needed for cases to complete the pre-adjudicatory and dispositional phases of court processes. It also can reduce the number of contested trials and reduce the length of time that children remain in temporary placements. It also can help make hearings themselves more substantive and meaningful. Finally, one of the last things I wanted to talk about with regards to enhanced resource guidelines helping to support with turnover is access to competent representation. Each party must be competently and diligently represented in order for juvenile and family courts to function effectively. This is one of the enhanced resource guidelines. The court should ensure that all parties have representatives, whether it's lawyers or non-lawyer GALs or advocates, and that those advocates have requisite training and experience necessary to help achieve the high quality of practice that's required in child and abuse and neglect cases. At each hearing, the judge should ensure that the parents have sufficient opportunity to consult with counsel and that counsel is prepared to advocate zealously on their behalf. And of course, having access to competent representation is one of the things that, again, more team members to help support these children and families, to help alleviate any disruptions that may occur if a social worker leaves, ensure that continuity. So having the access to competent representation is one way to help alleviate that turnover. But again, it's also the judge inquiring that the people that are representing these individuals are making sure that that accountability is taking place. Next slide. So what are some additional strategies for courts to support child welfare agencies? Next slide. So creating a supportive court environment. So we've kind of talked a little bit already about things to do, strategies to address. Courts can create a supportive court environment where all professionals feel valued and empowered to perform their roles effectively. Central to this effort is fostering this strong communication among judges, caseworkers, attorneys, and other stakeholders to ensure everyone is aligned and informed throughout the process. So we talk about strong communication. It's not just within the courtroom. It's those kind of meetings that have to take place outside of the courtroom. When we're talking about improving our child welfare system, who's all at the table, and are we feeling comfortable saying, hey, these are the things that we're experiencing, and how do we address this as a team? You can also work to prioritize professional development and training, encouraging continuous learning to equip teams with the skills and knowledge needed to navigate complex cases. When we talk about retention of caseworkers, professional development and training is one of the things that really helps to keep people feeling like I can do this job. I have the skills necessary to do it. And then we talked about this too already. Recognizing the hard work and dedication of caseworkers is another key element to creating a supportive court environment. Acknowledging their efforts helps boost morale and reinforces the commitment to the families that they're serving. So recognizing that hard work that's being done by the caseworkers, recognizing the hard work that's being done by the attorneys, and of course, recognizing the hard work that's being done by the families. Additionally, the court can focus on developing joint solutions to help alleviate workload pressures, promoting collaboration and shared responsibility. One example is prior to coming to working with NCJFCJ, I worked for a tribe, and they had a tribal TANF child welfare grant. And the goal was to help individual families who had a TANF case and a child welfare case to have one case plan that they were working. And so that joint solution to help alleviate the workload meant that the case plan was divided among two caseworkers. So instead of a caseworker working one plan and another caseworker working another plan, we combine the plan. Of course, that's easier for the family as well. And then it lessens the load on both of the caseworkers because they can divide and conquer the work that needed to be accomplished. The TANF caseworker could focus on job solutions while the child welfare worker could focus on the safety solutions. So focusing on those joint solutions to help alleviate the workload can help create that supportive court environment. Next slide. Judges also have the ability to advocate for meaningful policy changes that improve the conditions for social workers and in turn enhance the outcomes for children and families that they serve. By partnering with agencies, you can help reduce caseloads and help improve resources. Judges can work to address systemic challenges by seeking practical solutions that reduce burdens and create a more supportive environment for social workers that are in your court. So I spoke in depth earlier about collaboration being a great opportunity to address some of these systemic challenges that occur. So how do you as a judge help encourage that collaboration piece? Or how do you encourage joint solutions to help alleviate workload pressure? How are you aware of what's going on within your social services agency to make sure that some of these challenges are being addressed? Understanding that critical role also that training plays in equipping social workers for success, judges should actively request that agencies implement comprehensive training programs for new hires. And then drawing on your expertise, judges and other court staff can contribute directly to the development of training components focused on court interactions and procedures. This ensures that social workers are well prepared to help navigate the judicial aspects of their roles confidently and effectively. Next slide. So we've talked through understanding the impact of social worker turnover. We've given you hopefully some strategies and ideas. Does anyone have any questions or further input, whether you're a judge and maybe you're on here and you're a social worker and you'd like to say, hey, here are things that have been helpful for me from the court perspective to help promote the work that I'm doing. We'd love to hear from anyone, experiences, or again, if you have any questions. We have about 7 minutes left.
I'll go first and hopefully not last. I think that, first I want to thank NIJA and NCJFCJ for presenting this session. And Johanna, you've done a yeoman's job of presenting a very wide range of material and certainly enlightening me and hopefully others as well. I think that one of the things that I recall during my time on the bench, and bearing in mind that Albuquerque is a very small community by the standards of big cities throughout the country, but our child welfare agency very often would have events to basically focus on the children and the families, those who had their children returned to them, and also to highlight the work of their workers. They would invite our court folks to come. And unfortunately, very often, for many reasons, judges and other court professionals would not go. I would seize every opportunity when I was presiding judge to be seen and be heard, and usually have my wife accompany me. She's the secret weapon that engages almost everybody and has never met a stranger in her life. But being seen in out of the court situation with those who are affected by the court process sort of encourages those to say he's a regular human being, or she as the judge is a regular human being. We can interact with them, not about cases that are hanging out there right now, but just about, recognizing that you're part of the community. A judge that mentored me basically said, if you're going to be a children's court judge, you cannot, languish in your courtroom and in your chambers. Get off the bench, get out of your chambers and get out in the community and find out what's going on in your community. We are part of the community. We're part of those folks who work in our court system and part of the parents and the children who appear in our courts. So my urging would be that it's not just about being in court in those processes, but being an active member of your community as well. Thank you again, Johanna, and thank you to NIJA and NCJFCJ.
Thank you, Judge Romero. The work of a social worker isn't easy. The work in child welfare isn't easy. And so ways that we can address social worker turnover from our roles as judges, as other court personnel, it's so vital that we understand that we do have a role to play in helping our partners and helping the other agencies that we work with to be able to address these systemic issues and challenges that we're seeing. I mean, a turnover rate of 20 to 40% of social workers really is, such a large turnover rate. How do we start to address those issues from this bigger picture? And also from our roles, how do we make it easier to make sure that we're maintaining those caseworkers who are kind of our frontline people who are working with our children and our families?
There was a question. It says, any advice for not feeling overwhelmed by all of the things that are required to lead in helping our partners in the system of care?
My thought is that everybody seems to be overwhelmed. I think it's a question of prioritizing what needs to be done next. What's the most important thing you need to do? And you can only do one thing at a time, but plan and have a strategy for how you're going to deal with the mountain of overwhelming things that you're required to do. And again, I think as Johanna pointed out earlier, we need to make a priority of keeping children safe. And then next, making sure that families are not forgotten in the process, because most kids do want to go back to at least one of the parents and be part of that family. So child safety and then family togetherness, and perhaps even before that, preventative services that may be of priority. So it's easy to be overwhelmed. I think all of us get overwhelmed, but again, you have to pick what needs to be done first that's of the highest priority and then move on to the next one. And you take the weekend off if you have the luxury of doing so, or you take a 1 week vacation and you come back and it's the same old thing again. You're overwhelmed with things that are going on. So just have faith that you too can get this done with the help of other folks involved.
Thank you, Judge Romero. Somebody else just put a few other things. Michelle Rodriguez said, I have a hearing at least every 3 months, not weeks, on the interim hearing. I speak directly to the parents and children. I ask how they feel their case is going. What do they need to succeed? Are they getting the support they need? What is the first step in their mind? She said this has taken a minute to get stakeholders on board with, but that's something that she's done. Somebody else also had an answer for Donna. I just came back from a week vacation. I feel so much better, so I suggest taking a break, especially when you are feeling beyond overwhelmed, and make sure your health is a priority, which is the first step. You got to take care of yourself first before you can take care of any others. But Johanna, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I think one is like understanding that we can't address everything, like Judge Romero said, like prioritizing, but like understanding what is within our sphere of influence, right? And so these are the things that I have within my control. And so these are the things that I'm going to put within my control. And I see that these are kind of the issues that are prioritized, first to address. And then I think when I talk about like collaboration being a key piece is like when you have a collaborative team, more minds coming together, more creative solutions that can come into play, and also more people to help do the work. The more people you have at the table, the more people you have able to do the work together. And then another thing I say is some things take time and some things take a lot of time. And some things it's not the right time to do it right now. And so we have to think about this big picture and assess like, is now the right time to do this piece of this? Or do we maybe not have all the players at the table that we need to make something happen? So if we're trying to make changes within the social services agency and the social service agency is not interested in engaging at this time in any depth with the courts, maybe that's something, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to reflect on how can I change and mitigate things from just within the court system without that partnership of the social services agency. So when you take away the stuff that this isn't possible right now, that also can help with the overwhelm. I think
Awesome.
Andrew also said NCJFCJ has some wonderful Monday morning moments where they've talked about like self-care for judges, which is great, and other things that can help with the self-care aspect. So hopefully all of those can give you some guidance on the overwhelm. I know we're at the end of our time. I want to thank you for coming, for participating. we appreciate the work that you're doing, and we hope that we're able to provide you with some support as you encounter this work that you're doing with children and families in our communities. This is my contact information, Cassandra's contact information. If there's any additional training or technical assistance that you require, please reach out to Cassandra or I. We are very happy to support the work that you all are doing in your communities.
Thank you all.